Hello once again, investors. It's Nick Garner here from Investmore, and today we're going to do a house tour of a property we completed on. We're going to go through the actual property itself, the location, the demographics, the capital growth, and then finally we're going to get into some of the calculations so you can just see how this deal works from end to end. Okay then, let's get into it. And here's the property. It's on Rightmove historic listings because the current listings have been taken down because our client has bought the place and it's completed. One of the most interesting things about this property is the price history on it. And you can see that somebody paid £85,000 back in 2007, and it was sold for £74,000 in 2017 at a nominal loss. However, if you factor in inflation, which is critical, obviously, if you're doing your numbers, you can see that if £85,000, if you look at £85,000 in 2017 numbers and real purchasing power terms, that would be the equivalent of £112,000. If this property had stayed up with inflation, then it should have sold for £112,000. Effectively, this owner made a £35,000 loss on this purchase, which is a huge loss. Now, the current owner has paid £122,000 on it. And later on, we're going to look at some of the calculations and some of the capital growth figures, so you'll see what the potential trends are for this property. Anyhow, getting back into it, it's a very tidy property. It's got nice laminate flooring. We had a person go and view the place, and they didn't find anything wrong with it. It's got a presentable kitchen. Again, nice flooring. That looks like the old photography shows, I think, underlay, carpeting underlay. And you can see here a nicely presented bathroom, which might need a little bit of updating. Overall, it's a very pleasant property. Now, let's just have a quick look at the video so you can see what that looks like. And I'll run it from here, and you can see that it's really very nicely presented. The back room is very well done. There's no signs of damp. All of the flock wallpaper, the wood chip wallpaper and the likes, they've gone. And you can see here it's got new windows throughout, and it's also got, well, I say new windows, the fact is they're double glazed windows and they're not blown out either. One of the things to always look for is condensation between the windows, and it doesn't have any of that. The next thing is we're looking at the back patio doors, and again, same story. Those windows are in good condition. They need a bit of a clean, but overall that's a nice patio, or backyard, should I say, and those are good windows. Going up stairs, which I think we're about to do, yes. One of the things that we always look for when we view properties is just little details like dampness, whether the carpets need redoing, how well the carpets are laid. Now, these carpets are laid okay. It's not a particularly premium carpet, and the reason I can tell that is if I go back, I'll just go, what I'm looking for is, here we are, we'll just go back up the stairs, and if you notice on the edging of the carpet there's a little bit of undulation. Nothing major, but this is a budget carpet and that's okay. It looks like it's in reasonable, there you go. Oops. If I go back a tiny bit, you can see here you've got a little bit of this kind of stuff going on. So these are just tiny details that the new owner is going to just need to take care of, I expect, just to bring the place up to really high quality level. And interestingly here, you can see these rooms have these blinds. These are actually very popular in the north of England, and it's a nice touch having curtains here as well. So that makes it quite a pleasant environment. Nice two-tone paint, and there's space here for some fitted cupboards, I expect, if one wanted to. Now, if you're not familiar with these older houses, this room would have had a little fireplace here, and because it's a statutory requirement to have ventilation in rooms like bedrooms and so on, you can see here that there's a little ventilation window which allows air through into the old chimney, and that's what you're looking at there. And moving on, again, nicely done, good conditions overall, good, like the walls are in good condition. You can see there is a little bit of, it's got a backing. I'll just go back a tiny bit because there's a little detail you may not have picked up on, but I'll show you now. Just have to get to that pause point. And there. Oh, okay. I don't know if you saw that. There. Just there. Okay. Here we have some backing wallpaper. Now these walls all look like they're in good condition, and it's been nicely decorated. There's maybe a little bit of an edging issue there. You can see a little bit. But the reason we do these videos, as you see, is to get all the detail. We also have, you can just about see, we've gone, we'll pass on. Oh, somebody on a phone, a little bit of blackout. There we go, he's out of the way. And that looks like a thermostat. It looks like a reasonably, there's the thermostat there. So I assume that this is something, also something to do with the heating system. But all fine. These doors I wanted to comment on. These are fairly lightweight doors. You can see here that it's got anodized aluminium handles. There's nothing particularly interesting about this other than they're not particularly highly spec doors or anything. This property has the same tiles as it had a few years ago, but that's okay. The bathroom fittings are reasonable. They don't need to be changed. Now, if we go in here and we look at the shower, okay, it's got one of these electrically powered showers. Ideally, there would be a shower curtain here, but it's a small feature that can be added in later. Again, presentable, no signs of damp. One's always looking for damp in bathrooms because oftentimes people don't leave the windows open, you get mold growing sometimes, but this place is very clean. And again, we're looking at the walls. There's a little bit of shadowing here. This tells me that it might be the original plaster and lath wall, which would date from Victorian times, but nevertheless, it's been decorated pleasantly, and it's a reasonably nice house. There's a little something there. I don't know what that's all about, but that's a reasonably large, you could probably get a double bed in there. And I expect that that's some kind of cupboard or something like that. All right, and then we're about to head back downstairs. And I want to show you a couple of details. This is a well-made house. You can see here that this pointing has been done in the last however many years. And over here, you can see in the past somebody's had some sort of trellising for some plants, I expect. But what's most important is that the quality of the bricks is really good. So it's some kind of engineering, maybe not engineering brick, but whoever built these houses in the past did a good job. You can see the quality of the mortar is excellent. It's just a nicely presented house. And here's some other details to pay attention to. It's a leasehold property. Now, in the north of England, properties, especially terraced houses, were typically leasehold. And that's because an employer, like a mill owner or somebody like that nearby, would have built these houses to accommodate the workers, and they would have owned the land, and therefore they would have issued a lease on the property. Now, leaseholds are very straightforward things. I will do a video on this with Jamie, who is very much more knowledgeable on this kind of thing than me. But basically, leaseholds are very common in the north, and they don't pose any kind of issue with possibility of increasing leasehold rents and so on. Okay, the next thing is to look at the area, the location, and just check and make sure that it's not too close to commercial property or anything else that would affect its mortgageability. And this is obviously where Google Maps is wonderful, because it gives really helpful detail on an area. And we can see here 51 Lime Street. There is this premises here. This is actually a social club, as we can see. So I wouldn't be anxious about this. I think it's far away enough from this area to not be a worry. One of the problems that you can have sometimes is where you've got a property that's adjacent to, say, this kind of thing here, which would be some light industrial area. And the issue there is that you could have noise, smells, whatever, emanating from here, and there's very little you can do about it if you're in close proximity like these properties are. But this place is fine. The location's okay. It's got access via the back, and as we'll see shortly when we look at crime, this kind of issue isn't such a big deal if the crime levels are low. The other thing that's worth noting is there's some green patches nearby. And in fact, if you take a 5-minute walk and you get under the main road, which you can see that here, then there's this beautiful parkland and a wonderful amenity actually to have nearby. You've even got the river. It's very, very nice from that point of view. Now, one of the other things that we care about is access to amenities, and you can see that it's close to a high street here. And there's even a bank, and there are numerous high street amenities here. Now, one of the things we use is walk score for working out how close a property is to local amenities. We do this. We use a thing called an API, so we can assess these properties at scale, and we analyze maybe 5,000 properties a day using this walk score. And you can see here, according to this, it's very close to amenities. This is great. So overall, you can see that this property has a lovely location. It's quiet. It's not got a main through road or anything like that. It's close to some of the larger roads like this A666, but not so close that you're going to get road noise. You're close to parks, a green space, and obviously, as we said, amenities. This property works very well from a location point of view. Okay, then the next level up is the mapping, and we'll just go here. We have a little marker already set up, and we'll just zoom in a little bit. We'll start off with the demographics for the area, and then we'll work our way back out to the capital growth stuff, and then finally the numbers. In this case, we've output area data, which is a designation the government use for census reporting, and it essentially represents 150 people or thereabouts, maybe 30 to 40 houses, that kind of thing. And one of the fortunate things about using this data is that the information or demographics in an area don't change very much from one decade to another. And we found this by testing this hundreds of times, in fact, where we gather information on a local area, and then we measure it up against the mapping and see how it all fits together. And it most always does. The only time this data doesn't match is when you get urban regeneration, i.e. you get new new build in an area, and then new people move in. But apart from that, it's very robust. All right, well, let's get into what it means. The most people mostly speak English around here, the average age being 33. Now, having looked at these metrics thousands of times, I can tell you that when you look at average age, you don't need much of a shift one way or the other for there to be a heavy bias in one direction. So if the average age is 33, it generally denotes that it's a relatively young area. If it's 38, 40, then that means it's a much older area with older people, more pensioners, people like that. Anyhow, this is a relatively young working area. There's quite a high proportion of privately rented, and this is a very encouraging sign. Now, the reason I like to see 20% or thereabouts privately rented is because it tells me that other people want to rent here and that landlords want to buy here. And therefore, in a sense, it's a tested area for private renting. So this is a very encouraging sign. We can see a relatively low proportion of population socially renting, so that's something. And that the majority here are DE. Now, generally speaking, with social DE, what that means is it's people who are unemployed or living, who are economically precarious. In this case, it's not such a problem, as we'll see later, because crime levels are low. And we can see that there's quite a high proportion of C1s. And these are the people who don't have enough money to buy their own property, but they do have enough money to rent and live comfortably. So they would be middle managers, people, senior tradespeople, or knowledge workers, people like that who earn a reasonably good income, have reasonable disposable income and reasonable job security. And these are really the ideal tenants. Overall, we've got 75% of the local population working. That's good. A low number for this would be, say, 46. So if we look at this area down the road, we can see that we have higher DE, much higher social rented, 78% social rented, and 46% of people working. And therefore, we can say with confidence that this little patch here is just a good, solid residential area with not much crime, and we'll get into the crime in a second, with working people who want to enjoy an area like this. The next thing we're going to get into is crime. And the way I've done the crime data is I've downloaded all the crime data for the whole of the UK over a year-long period. Now, some police forces, especially Manchester, have been very slow in updating their data, but I've got 12 months data for them, and this data gives us a general indication of crime in this area. So it's not bang up to date, as you see, but actually over a year-long period, it gives us an idea of whether this is a high crime area or not. And what you can see is that this is pretty high crime. And the other thing I'll just point out is I built an algorithm, which is a weighted scoring system, and it upweights and upscores everything, all these crimes which have a bearing on homeowners. So this would be violent crime, burglary, any other crime which makes life unpleasant for people living in the area. However, as you can see, this property here, it's very close to these major amenities, which is great. This is a really good location, I've got to say. But anyway, these are what I call high street crimes. So you've got a lot of people passing through, and therefore you just naturally accumulate crimes over a long period of time. This is high crime. But this isn't a high crime area. You can see 1, 2, 3, or 4 antisocial behavior. That's nothing particularly important. Public order, other theft. So this is Somebody being drunk and disorderly, there's nothing major here. And also, one other thing to note is when the police list crimes, what they do is they list them by street. They won't show you exactly where the crime occurred, but they'll just talk about, they'll mention the street, and therefore we can say over a whole year-long period there were 2 crimes here. So what were they? Violence and sexual offences. Okay, so there was some sort of altercation here, but overall, to me, this is a low crime area and very desirable. Okay, now we're going to zoom out and we're going to look at capital growth. And this is where it gets a little bit more techy, but if you can bear with me, these numbers are important, because once you can start to understand the overall growth story in the area, then you can see where you can make money, because the money is in capital growth. If we go back to this story here, this person effectively bought at the top of the market, sold at the bottom of the recent market, which is unfortunate. This is from Land Registry, and it shows the capital growth within an area, a postcode district area like this. And you can see here that this is actually inflation adjusted. That's why it's real growth, 29% in this little patch here. You can see in other areas from over the last 5 years, you can see 40%, 37%. One of the things that one has to bear in mind with capital growth data is that it can get skewed relatively easily. And therefore, it's better to just look at a general overview, and then from there you can draw a general conclusion. One of the interesting things to note is that city centre properties have done really badly. These are apartment blocks that might have cladding issues, for example. So the other issue is that they're small, they're very urban, and I think there's a general migration away from city centre in any event to the outskirts, and we can see this in the capital growth numbers. So I'm going to hide this layer here, and then we can just zoom out a little bit, and you could see short term just quite a lot of capital decline, but very often what you see is capital decline in areas that aren't desirable, i.e. there's too much crime or whatever. But this little patch has done nicely, and in the last year it's gone up by around 5%, which is great. And overall, this tells me that this general area, it's a good solid place for good future capital growth. Okay, in this final segment we're going to get into the calculations. This is very geeky stuff. However, if you're an investor, you care about your numbers because, as I always say, the numbers tell the truth. And in this case, I've got a scenario which assumes that you're a non-resident landlord. Whether you're a company, a non-resident company, or just an individual, from a tax point of view, it doesn't make any difference. The government have closed that loophole, and therefore you pay 20% on your rental income minus expenses. The calculator also factors in stuff like postcode district and stuff, so later on we're going to look at capital growth, and that's why we need this. It's a house, obviously, 2-bedroom. It's been purchased for 122. It's expected to rent for 625, and therefore gives us a gross yield of 5.6, which is pretty good. We assume that it'll be purchased on a 75% loan to value. Now, from what I understand, although I'm not 100% sure, this property was purchased for cash, I think, and will be refinanced later, which is a smarter way to do things in general, because it just means you can get hold of the property more easily and quickly than if you've got a mortgage. The stress test, this is for banking, for borrowing, so it just means that if you borrow cash, the property has to achieve a certain loan to value and a few other stress tests and so on. And this property achieves those, passes those stress tests. The next thing is stamp duty. If you are a non-resident, you're obviously going to have to pay a little bit of extra stamp duty beyond being a resident or an actual homeowner, owner-occupier. Then you've got purchase costs, and then you've got property consulting fee, that's us, and the relevant discount depending on the deal you've got with us. And then we've got the total fees and the cash deposit. We assume that there's going to be a small expenditure on the property, so the total purchase will be 43k. That would be the cash outlaid to own the property once financed by the bank. If you buy a property as an individual, whether it's resident or non-resident, typically interest rates are cheaper. And this is ultimately because the banks see an individual is less of a risk, and therefore they'll charge less interest because there's less risk of default on the mortgage. That's why in many ways it's just better to buy a property through yourself as an individual rather than through a limited company. That equation changes if you're a UK resident, and in that case then buying through a limited company just makes a whole lot more sense from a tax point of view. Okay, the next thing is we've got the usual repairs and maintenance and insurances, etc. And then we've got the total interest costs, which is 3.5k, and we've got annual costs here, obviously. So the other part of it is the rental income, and in this case we've got 1 month void per year because you can't assume you're going to get 100% occupancy, and that means that your pre-tax profits from your rental income is £1,900. You pay £1,000 in tax, therefore your total after-tax profits are going to be 833. The margin, this is the profit as a percentage of total revenue, is 12%, which is thin. And you can see that the ROI from first year is 1.92%. It's a very thin looking deal, and from a cash point of view, it's not looking great. But anyway, let's go forward 5 years and assume that we are looking at the deal in 5 years' time. How did it do? If we assume inflation adjusted numbers, which is quite helpful, then we can see that the numbers go up, and that's because your interest costs remain the same, expenses go up, but also so does income. So your rent income is your biggest component here, and therefore over time, if you don't refinance, then you progressively make more and more money from this deal, and therefore if you annualize inflation adjusted, that's around 3%, which is still not great. 10%, you'd be up to around 4%. Now, the story really changes when you factor in capital growth. So let's say capital growth carries on growing, or the area carries on growing at the same rate it did over the last 5 years for the next 5 years. And as we can see from the map, this area has been good. And here we are here. This is the capital growth in this postcode district, 29% real and around 41% nominal. And this is fairly typical of this area. Loads of areas within Manchester have been extremely strong. Short-term growth has been good, long-term growth has been good, and I'm pretty confident that it'll carry on this way. So my bet for Manchester is that capital growth will continue much as it was for at least the next 5 years. Now, what does that mean in terms of the deal and how it works? Well, in nominal terms, i.e. not inflation adjusted, it would grow in value 51k. In inflation adjusted terms, you can see that in real terms you would grow £23,500 richer in real terms by owning this property, based on what you could sell it for, or based on the not what you could sell it for, but yeah, based on what you could sell it for but this doesn't factor in expenses, and we'll get into that in a minute. Overall, the longer term story in this property is very strong. Now, in ROI terms, i.e. you put in 40k, what do you get out? Well, in real terms, you're getting an ROI of 10% a year, which is really strong. Every year you just sit on that property, it grows by £4,700. Now, if you remember, we looked at the cash return on the property, which was around £800 a year, give or take. So I think if we go down here, 833, and if we look at the if we look at the capital growth, then that means 833. Let's just get a calculator. I'm going to bring one over to that screen there. Is 833 is divided by 47. I'll just make it 4700. So that's 17%, or if I do it the other way around, if I go 4700, 4700 divided by 833, you make 5.6 times more money through just the capital growth on this property than you do through the rent. Now, if you include the rent income, let's say you've paid your tax, you're just going to put it in a savings account somewhere and let it cook, then you're making 13.9% ROI, which is a very strong return on investment for this property. If you if you look at a 10-year story, it's roughly the same in ROI terms. You just double everything. Now, the next question is, what about the exit? What are you going to do? And the answer is, it's not going to work as a flip. But if you decide to hang on to it for 5 years at least, and you refinance in 5 years, then at 75% loan to value, then you could extract £40,000 or inflation adjusted £34,000. Now, the important point to remember with proceeds from a loan is that it's not earned income, it's simply a loan. And therefore it's not taxable. And this is important because with the proceeds of a loan, the bank is just going, okay, well, we'll lend you, we'll refinance, and here's your money, and you can do what you like with it. If you decided to buy another property, in theory, you could buy some kind of cheap apartment, maybe a one-bedroom apartment or something like that, because bear in mind there will be house price inflation over that time. But the fact is that if you refinance, then in theory you could increase your portfolio for nothing, for no cost to you, other than you bought the property in the first place and you just let it cook for 5 years. So time becomes your friend if you have good capital growth. And if we take the same story over 10 years, obviously the numbers grow, and you could extract 115k in 10 years, which is good pension money if you're of that age. You could also just refinance and buy a bigger property. Bear in mind there will be capital growth on property, relatively speaking, but overall this would probably buy you a nice-ish one-bedroom flat or a two-bedroom property, something a little more substantial. If you decided to sell and cash out, then you have selling expenses, obviously, and you'll also have a little bit of capital gains, and therefore if you added everything up, that's your inflation adjusted exit amount, 40k, that's how much you would have made. And if you get your deposit, you've paid your selling expenses and all your other stuff, then just on capital gains alone, you'd walk away with 54k. If, on the other hand, it was a 10-year exit, then it would be 94,000. So you can see that you're inflation adjusting these numbers. So if you think about it non-inflation adjusted, you put in 40k, and then you've got all your expenses, etc. You're exiting at 73. That's 33k up or something like that. I hope that was helpful. This is a pretty typical deal. We process thousands of properties every day, and we find maybe 10 properties as good as this every day, and probably another 20 which are still pretty viable deals. The great thing about buying around Greater Manchester is that the capital growth has been robust over the last 5 years. The city is economically very strong, and I think it'll continue to be that way. Also, I think it's going to act as a magnet for young people who are economically productive in the longer term. And that's why I'm very confident about Manchester as a whole. Anyhow, I hope that was helpful. And until next time, good investing.